I was born in the Albany Park neighborhood of Chicago to immigrant parents. My mom came from Guatemala, and my dad was a refugee fleeing the civil war in El Salvador, as his country was being used as a proxy war between the United States and Soviet Union during the 80s. To this day, my dad works as a landscaper, a job he's held for over 45 years. Sometimes, my dad would come home with gifts his customers would give him since he would often fix up the gardens of his more elderly clients free of charge. One day, when I was only 10, one of his clients, an elderly Polish man whose name I have unfortunately forgotten, gave my dad a huge Polish sausage and a six-pack of Polish beer as gratitude for his free services. The Polish man told my dad, quote, "I want you to try something from my country. I hope you enjoy it." End quote. Well, enjoy it we did. While I was too young to enjoy the six-pack of Polish beer, my mom, in her old-fashioned culinary expertise, cut up the Polish sausage along with some veggies, some eggs, and fixed us up an amazing dinner. We ate well that day, and I'll never forget the taste of that Polish sausage. It hit differently, especially for a Latino American kid like myself, who up until then thought sausages only came in the form of Oscar Mayer wieners and chorizo. This is my first vivid memory of Polish culture being introduced to me. As I grew older and gained an interest in travel, I discovered the rich and unique history that the Polish community has in my home city of Chicago. This community has been here, in my home city, the entire time, and yet I never properly explored its food, culture, and people. But it's never too late to start, and the Polish community in Chicago is filled with history that is fascinating as it is complex. A community that is at once one thing and many different things. A community that, though demographics have changed since the Polish first arrived to Chicago in the 1830s, you don't have to look hard to find the huge impact the Polish have made in Chicago over the years. Historically, while Chicago isn't the only major city the Polish have immigrated to, Chicago has nonetheless been an important hub for Polish immigrants. So much so that Chicago has often been referred to as Poland's quote-unquote second city. Even today, many people think only the Polish capital of Warsaw has more Polish people than Chicago. This is more of an urban legend, but it's an urban legend based in reality. Demographically speaking, Chicago never had more Polish people than other major Polish cities like Krakow or Gdansk. However, the importance of Chicago to the Polish immigrant community has been so great that it even rivaled other big American cities like New York City. For over a century and a half, the Polish have made Chicago their second home in the US, which is where the whole second city title comes from. Take a small stroll outside the Adler Planetarium and you'll find a monument to Polish astronomer Nicholas Copernicus, the father of modern astrology. Not far from the Copernicus monument, you'll also find another monument to Thaddeus Kosciuszko, a Polish general who was exiled from Poland after fighting against the Russian Empire and found himself fighting for American independence during the Revolutionary War. In the south side of Chicago, you can find the Union Stockyard Gate, the last remaining structure of the once mighty Union Stockyards, where thousands of Polish workers butchered livestock for over a century. In downtown Chicago, you'll find the Haymarket Memorial, and a reminder of how immigrant workers, many of them Polish, had to make tremendous sacrifices for the workers' rights we have today. Indeed, Chicago's Polish history can be overwhelming. Luckily, I found the perfect wingman to help me put this history together. This is Dr. Peter Alter, the chief historian at the Chicago History Museum. I met him by chance at the annual Polonia Festival, and he was kind enough to take some time and explain how the Polish came to be one of the biggest immigrant communities in Chicago.
We know from studying Chicago history, U.S. history, immigration history, that some of the earliest Polish immigrants came to Chicago, 1830s and 40s. But really, the biggest era of immigration, or the first and the most familiar era of immigration that Polish people came to Chicago, really started a little bit after that, more like the 1860s or 70s, and through the start of World War I, so roughly 1914. These were folks who were coming out of primarily three empires. So there was obviously not a Poland. Poland had ceased to exist in the late 18th century. So when they come to the United States, of course, they're not coming from Poland. They're coming from the Russian Empire. They're coming from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They're coming from the German Empire. And so that kind of creates confusion right away. And in many of those, well, really all of those places, their Polish history, Polish culture, Polish language is subservient to whatever the dominant empire is. So, for example, in the Russian Empire, and of course, this is long before the Soviet Union, in the Russian Empire, there was a policy of Russification. That means people should be Russian. So those folks who come in that first era, that's called the four bread or Zachlebem era, they settle in places like the Southeast Side community working in the steel mills, the South Side community of Back of the Yards working in the stockyards just to the east of there. Other communities on the Southwest Side working in sort of similar industries. Then folks at the same time are also living on the North Side. So for Chicagoans, your Chicago viewers, they might be familiar with the Polish Triangle neighborhood. And for, anyone watching and furiously Googling, like, where is that? Well, we know historically and, to the present day, that's, roughly the triangle of at North Ashland Avenue, West Division Street, and North Milwaukee Avenue. So Milwaukee is an angled street, so it creates a triangle, oddly enough, with Ashland here and Division here. So those folks that are from the four-bread immigration, they, become maybe not so much the newcomers, but their children, grandchildren, and so forth. There's that classic for basically all immigrant and refugee communities, right, in the United States and Chicago in particular, where there's a struggle with language. What language are you going to speak? Where are you going to school? Are you going to go to a public school? Are you going to go to a parochial school? If you go to a parochial school, are you going to go to one where Polish history, culture, language is very important, or is it, let's say, a mixed, in air quotes, kind of community, educational community? So that's the first era of immigration. So World War I happens, and that really ends that four-bread era of immigration because, excuse me, the sort of Polish peasants that we're talking about, they might get forced into basically drafted into one of those three armies, right? The German army, the Russian army, or the Austro-Hungarian army, and so, or they may flee. And it's not to say absolutely no one came, but certainly the numbers were much smaller. So World War I happens. The 1920s. What's interesting about World War I, though, for Poland is that Poland becomes a country. So it stopped being a country in the late 1700s. And actually, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, he has a plan for the post-World War I world. And his many points include Poland being an independent country. The Polish state that happens, it's usually called the interwar. Interwar is actually the kind of the largest extent of Poland that we know in the 20th century or 21st. So the last century and this one. It's also a as European historians will say, or Polish historians of Poland, it's a multi-ethnic state. So there's There's Polish Roman Catholics, there's Polish Jews, there's Ukrainians, there's Lithuanians, there's some Muslim Tartars. Especially by European standards, it's a very diverse state. It's also a much larger state than the state we know that's created after World War II. So World War II comes like any major cataclysm, military cataclysm like that. People are displaced. There's internally displaced persons. There's persons displaced outside of Poland. And so, just as we've experienced generations and generations of refugees from, countries like Guatemala, today Venezuela, Ethiopia, many other countries, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and so forth, to cities like Chicago. Polish people are made refugees, and there's what's called the displaced persons era. And so that's roughly from the end of World War II, around 1945. And then actually, there's a specific time when you legally are called a displaced person, and I'm forgetting the specific date, but it's the early 1950s. So those folks come to Chicago. They come to a Chicago where there's like Polish radio stations. Eventually, there's Polish TV. There's Polish newspapers. There's Polish libraries, obviously churches. One of the issues is that the folks who are displaced persons, who are refugees, they are typically from Polish cities. They are typically well educated, or before the war, they were on an educational track like law school, medical school, engineers, and so forth. So right away, there's this clash. And there's a great book called Opposite Poles, which is about, in part, this clash. And also, it's a nice play on words. The Poland that is represented in Chicago before the displaced persons come is a Poland kind of in a time capsule, trapped in the late 19th and early 20th century. Because, World War I happens, people aren't going back to Poland. Depression happens, people aren't going back to Poland. World War II happens, people definitely aren't going back to Poland. So they're not interacting with like the culture of the homeland unless it's, basically via people from there or correspondence back and forth. And of course, viewers remember there's no, other than telegraph, there's not like long distance phone calls. And of course, we're many, many decades before, magical smartphones. Then the next era of immigration is called the Solidarity era. So we know Poland after World War II becomes a communist dictatorship within the Soviet Union's sphere. Of course, Soviet Russia becomes a country after World War I, and then it grows into the Soviet Union after World War I and through World War II. So Poland is legal, like the sort of de jure, that is by law an independent country, but de facto a satellite state of the Soviet Union. So that means anything that happens in Poland in terms of governmental structure, governmental decisions, doesn't happen unless it's approved by the Soviet Union's leadership. So obviously that's not a very fun place to live. And so without going into too much detail, there's a anti-communist pro-democracy movement that develops actually, oddly enough, through the labor movement in the north of Poland, a leader who's pretty famous and who's won the Nobel Peace Prize, Lech Wałęsa, and a group called Solidarity. So hence we get the Solidarity era immigrants or refugees. Really, they're what we would call political refugees, what were called political refugees back then. As we know from, now the long after the fall of communism, that these countries had command economies. So there was not a free market economy with its upsides and its many downsides. And so it was people who were alive back then watching the news or living in those countries know of long lines for food staples like bread. And I've heard the story, like people in Warsaw, for example, would just get in a line. Once they got in a line, they would say, "Hey, what are we waiting for?" And then they would learn, bread, milk, meat, whatever. And if you needed one of those things, you would stay in the line. If not, you would get out. So that's the scenario for the displaced persons, or excuse me, the Solidarity era political refugees and other immigrants. So they're creating, if you will, a third pole, because you have the original four bred descendants, you have the displaced persons, and now you have the newest group. And the newest group, even if they were political dissidents in Poland, they're kind of viewed with a suspicious eye because they lived and maybe grew up in the communist dictatorship. So while they may be seen as, on the surface, as political refugees opposing the Soviet Union and the Polish communist dictatorship, they're still suspect because they grew up in a communist Poland. As we know, even from a simple Google search, the Soviet Union collapses, their communist influence spheres collapse, communist dictatorships collapse, and so the Polish government, the Polish communist dictatorship collapses as well in the late 80s and early 90s. So it's actually, unfortunately, an overlooked era of immigration. People are always talking about the four-bred, the displaced persons, and the Solidarity era, but there is a significant group of folks who came, basically from the early 90s to the early 2000s. And Polish immigrants stopped coming to Chicago and the US in general by around 2004, because that's when Poland joins the European Union. And so, for example, when Great Britain was in the European Union before Brexit, they could go to London. Polish immigrants could go to London to work during the week and easily get back to wherever in Poland on the weekend, or Dublin. Dominic through his book. I know him through his book and personally, but Dominic Pasigas told stories of being in Dublin, Ireland, and hearing Polish, and just like Polish bars, and lots of Polish folks living in Dublin, Ireland, for example. So Chicago no longer becomes this sort of focal point for immigration because it's much easier to go in Europe.
Dominic Pasiga's book, American Warsaw, talks at length about how important the Catholic Church was to the Polish community here in Chicago, an importance that is relevant today as churches such as the Holy Trinity Polish Catholic Church still give their sermons in Polish. While there were other religious groups such as Polish Jews and Polish Tatar Muslims, Polish Catholics were definitely the majority within their community. During times when Poland was in danger of being swallowed by foreign powers during World War I and World War II, Polish Catholics united to come to the aid of Poland. But in times of relative peace, Polish Catholics weren't necessarily united. Many fought amongst themselves over what being Polish really meant, which was an issue more complex than just asking whether or not you were a Catholic who came from Poland. Different Polish organizations in Chicago, some Catholic, some not, had different ideas about what it meant to be Polish, and that caused a lot of division within the Chicago Polish community. Dr. Peter Alter puts these conflicts of Polish identity within Catholicism into historical perspective to better understand this conflict of Polish identity.
People who are familiar with sort of immigration history in the United States, we know that any immigrant or refugee sending country, people come with their not only language, culture, and experiences, but also their regional differences, right? So there are, and I don't think they're as strong, nearly as strong in the 21st century Poland, but in the Polish lands, especially before World War I, there were great regional differences based on all kinds of things. Different dialects, what empire was in charge of you, where you like the geography around you. For example, Dominic's family, they're mountaineers, Górale, like that means roughly like the mountains in Polish. And they're kind of seen as like the hillbillies of Poland. So they were looked down on by everyone, right? Everyone who wasn't a mountaineer. But especially on the south side, that's where a lot of mountaineers live. So you see like homeland differences translating into parish differences. You see class differences translating into parish differences. And then also, like, the farther you get into the 20th century, are we going to have, let's say Mass is still in Latin, but are we going to conduct like our parish business in English or in Polish or in both languages? And then as Latin fades away, then the question is, Polish Mass, English Mass, or both, at different times. And obviously, then you even have differences within parishes. And also, we talked about the Polish Roman Catholic Union and the Polish National Alliance. Parishes also kind of align themselves with those organizations. And so they would kind of have sort of sponsors, if you will. And so that created divisions. Polish people, like everyone else, are humans, and we humans like to divide ourselves and pit each other against ourselves, right? And so there are a lot of different ways, just like every other community finds different ways, whether it's homeland differences, regional differences, dialect, class, part of the city, and on and on.
Another issue that divided Polish and Polish Americans was language. Many Polish who came to Chicago after the four-bread era, or the first wave of immigration, did not like the fact that their Polish predecessors didn't speak Polish the same way they spoke Polish in the motherland. Many were even perplexed by the mixture of English words many Polish who were more established in Chicago were using along with their native language. This always stood out to me because it's such a universal immigrant experience. Yes, the Polish made a strong community in Chicago, but it wasn't going to be a direct copy of Poland. Immigrating from one country to another is a major life change, regardless of how much you want to make the new country feel like the old. With this in mind, I wanted to hear from the experience of someone who immigrated from Poland to Chicago. For this, I turned to my friend Anna. She immigrated to the U.S. from Poland at an early age, and we sat down for a talk and some coffee so I could learn from her experience.
How the story went is my mom actually came here first, and so she was going to do the establishing for myself and my dad. I was supposed to come with my dad, but then and I think it was about 2 months later. So she came in March, and I think my dad came in May. So I was supposed to come with my dad. However, come May, I got sick, and then like all the paperwork fell through because I couldn't get the doctor clearance, which was part of the requirement. So so then everything expired, and I had to restart the paperwork from the beginning. So.
And what city in Poland were you born?
So it's called Biłgoraj. It's in the southeastern portion. It's like not the biggest city, but I mean, I think it's like for the area, it's pretty much kind of like the center of the little villages and whatnot.
Living a sizable portion of your childhood in Poland.
Yes.
And then coming here all of a sudden. How was that growing up for you? Because Chicago, obviously, big Polish population, but still, how was it going from the motherland to now Chicago?
I think initially it was kind of hard. I mean, like I eventually, for those 5 years, let's say that I was there, I knew that I was eventually gonna come here, so I did start learning English, I will say. It wasn't very, I guess like through those 5 years, I didn't really become fluent by any means. It was, cat, dog, pencil, pen, count to 10, or beyond. I don't recall, but it was just very minimal. It wasn't like, I was not fluent by any means. So being here, going into the school system, where I was just fully immersed in the English language, it was like a bit of a shock, and I hated it, and I definitely like struggled with it because you get reading assignments and everything was in English. So then, what like homework would take for say like the average student, I don't know, like read 20 pages or read one chapter in a book. So for them it would be, I don't know, maybe like 30 minutes. For me, it was like 3-hour ordeal. Because that was obviously like through that time my mom was helping me with it. So very much appreciative of that. But yeah, I think like the transition was a little bit hard because obviously you get homesick. All of my family is back in Poland, like all of my classmates, all of my friends. So literally like the only people I had here were my parents.
As a kid, that must be hard.
Yeah, but I think it definitely was. It definitely was. But I think also as a kid, you adapt quicker. So kind of like starting school here, there was actually a Polish girl in my class. So she kind of became my friend. So I had a little bit of that, and then kind of like a couple of, once I kind of like started learning English a little bit more, then a couple of the kids, like at the bus stop who lived in the area. So it definitely became a little bit easier, but initially it was very hard, always, obviously it was pretty apparent that I was not from here because I had a very thick accent. So sometimes you get like teased about that because kids will be kids. But besides that, it wasn't terrible, I will say. It definitely sucks in the moment, but when you kind of like get past it a little bit, it does become easier. I was kind of like blessed in a way that my parents would send me back every summer to go to Poland to like spend time with my family, kind of visit with my friends from elementary school and whatnot. So it kind of pretty much started out that every summer, the day the like school would end, the next day or even that same day, I would be on the flight to Poland. I would go there for 2 or 3 months at a time and come back like a week before school started. So initially in those years it was like great, but then once I kind of I started becoming like older, into the teen years, then I kind of wanted like a little bit of more time with my friends here, to just do fun things over the summer. But I still would go back pretty much every year to visit with family. And I think like as I recall, I'm pretty sure I kept it up every year until maybe past my freshman or sophomore year in college. So it's been kind of like a tradition which I'm blessed with, just because I got to see all of my cousins, all of my aunts and uncles, my grandparents. So.
The Polish community, like any immigrant community, has had its disagreements. But if there is one thing even non-Polish people like myself can agree on, is that Polish food is delicious. In Chicago, you don't have to search hard at all for good Polish food, though longtime establishments do reflect the changing times of the Polish presence in Chicago. One restaurant I really wanted to add to this video was the famous Podalanka, located in the middle of the Polish Triangle. While I have eaten at Podalanka twice and had their delicious pierogi and Polish sausage, by the time I was working on this video, it was unfortunately closed. But it wasn't because of low business. The owner and cook of Podalanka, Halina Madesz, simply wanted to retire and move back to Poland. She took over the restaurant back in 1986, and for over 38 years, she served the most delicious, traditional Polish food in the city of Chicago. I was lucky enough to try it while they were still around, and let me tell you, nothing beats Polish food made by a Polish grandma. It was absolutely delicious, and while it is heartbreaking that Chicago will no longer have Podalanka's traditional Polish food, I am happy that Halina Madesz can retire and return to the country that she has missed dearly for nearly 4 decades. But one food that is definitely not going anywhere is the famous Maxwell Street Polish. When it comes to Chicago, the Maxwell Street Polish ranks up there with other famous Chicago foods such as the deep dish pizza, Italian beef, and Chicago-style hot dog. While you can get the Maxwell Street Polish in many mom-and-pop restaurants, Jim's Original, near downtown Chicago, is most famous for mainly serving their Maxwell Street Polish. However, the name is technically a misnomer. The Maxwell Street Polish was actually created by a Macedonian immigrant, Jimmy Stefanovic, back in the late 1930s. The reason it's called a Maxwell Street Polish is twofold. First, the main ingredient is the unmistakable Polish sausage, or kielbasa, which is grilled to perfection and then put on a hot dog bun with a few swabs of mustard and covered in a healthy amount of grilled onions. Add in some really hot peppers and you have yourself a meal worthy of Chicago. The second reason is Maxwell Street itself, or at least what's left of it. Roughly from the 1840s through the 1990s, Maxwell Street was the market street where immigrant and the working class communities in Chicago would come to buy their produce and all kinds of everyday items. Maxwell Street was not only an important economic hub, it drew many communities together. Greeks, Bohemians, Russians, Germans, Italians, Mexicans, African Americans, and of course, Polish. So, in such a culturally rich part of the city, it makes sense that a Macedonian immigrant would buy a Polish sausage and create the iconic Maxwell Street Polish. Unfortunately, only a fraction of the original Maxwell Street exists today. In the 1950s, the Dan Ryan Expressway cut through a big portion of Maxwell Street, causing it to shrink. By the 1970s, economic redevelopment and renovation to Maxwell Street itself led to further reductions. By the 1990s, the University of Illinois Chicago's need of new facilities required huge chunks of whatever was left of Maxwell Street, dealing the final death blow to an economic and iconic market hub. Many established family businesses that flourished during the boom days of Maxwell Street didn't survive. But thankfully, Jim's Original, the birthplace of the Maxwell Street Polish, was able to relocate not too far from the street that made it a food icon of Chicago. Now, while the Maxwell Street Polish is considered Chicago street food, the zapiekanka is authentic Polish street food. During my research for this video, I discovered a Polish food truck in Schiller Woods, right on the Chicago city limits. The name says it all, Zapiekanka XXL. For those who might not know, a zapiekanka is an open-faced sandwich that kind of looks like a pizza. It was created in the streets of Poland in the 1970s when Poland was under the rule of the Soviet Union. Many Polish workers needed something quick and easy to eat. The allowance of French baguettes in various parts of Poland made people get creative with their street food, especially when ingredients were scarce. Meat was often a luxury. Therefore, the traditional zapiekanka comes with mushrooms, a thick blanket of cheese, scallions, and Polish ketchup. Now, as a Chicagoan, ketchup is a very bad word. I only put ketchup on my fries, and if I ever see someone put ketchup on a Chicago-style hot dog, I'm calling the cops. But when it comes to the zapiekanka, ketchup is a vital ingredient. In fact, at first, the owner of Zapiekanka XXL, Justyna Halush, tried to use marinara instead of the Polish ketchup. But her customers didn't like it. It wasn't Polish street food without the ketchup. So, the ketchup stayed. The differences in Polish ketchup as opposed to American ketchup are subtle. The Polish ketchup doesn't overpower other flavors like American ketchup does. This allows you to taste the mushrooms, cheese, and scallions along with the ketchup. The baguette itself is also nicely toasted and gives the zapiekanka a nice crunch every time you take a bite. Coming from a guy that has a huge adversity to ketchup, the zapiekanka made me a believer that ketchup can be used to enhance flavor. Today, the Polish community is free to use as much meat as they want on their zapiekanka, such as ham, bacon, and even sausage. But the traditional zapiekanka is a reminder of food made out of necessity when Poland was under a communist dictatorship. You had to make your food last back then, so you could only get half the baguette. Things like mushrooms and cheese were the only ingredients in abundance back then. And yet, under the thumb of Soviet dictatorship, the spirit of the Polish created something unique that thankfully made it all the way to Chicago so that it can be shared with the world. Now, one thing I learned in exploring and appreciating Polish cuisine is that modification of classic dishes isn't always a bad thing, as long as you respect its cultural roots. Pierogi Kitchen is exactly what the name entails. It is a restaurant that specializes in pierogies. As their own website will tell you, quote, Pierogi Kitchen is here to serve the Chicago community the taste of Polish flavors, old and new, with our homemade pierogi dough recipe passed on to us for generations. End quote. Key phrase there, old and new. While Pierogi Kitchen respects and serves the classic pierogies with stuffings such as meat, potato and cheese, and cabbage, Pierogi Kitchen isn't afraid to be creative. Their popular pierogi is actually a brisket pierogi. Yeah, you heard me. Brisket pierogi. At first, I wasn't too sure this combination would work. Don't get me wrong, I was intrigued by a brisket pierogi, but you always have to be careful when messing with a classic. And in the Polish culinary world, pierogis are sacrosanct. Thankfully, it was delicious. The soft pierogi dough along with the tender, flavorful brisket complemented each other very well, and I can see why it's Pierogi Kitchen's bestseller. Is it Americanized? Yes, but just because something is Americanized doesn't mean it's bad, as long as you respect the food's cultural roots, and Pierogi Kitchen most definitely respects the Polish roots for which pierogis come from. But if you're in the mood for something more traditionally Polish, Ugasti has you covered. Located in the Wooddale suburb of Chicago, Ugasti serves all types of traditional Polish foods. The restaurant itself has a mountaineer kind of vibe. It reminds me of the Polish Highlanders that Dr. Peter Alter mentioned. During my visit, I had the Polish white borscht soup. Made from fermented cereals such as oats, rye, and wheat, this gives the soup a slight sour taste. The white borscht soup also comes with sliced hard-boiled eggs, potatoes, and smoked sausage or bacon. It is a perfect soup for a cold winter day. There is also a red beet borscht soup, but that one is more Ukrainian in origin. For my main meal, I had the galupki, a steamed cabbage roll that is stuffed with pork, beef, rice, and a little bit of onions. It's smothered in either tomato or mushroom sauce. As you can see, I went with tomato sauce for my galupki, and it was delicious. The tomato sauce is very different from what you would eat in, say, spaghetti or pasta. The sauce is not as thick, and I could tell that spices were added to enhance the flavor, though I couldn't pinpoint which spices, and I'm assuming different restaurants have their own recipes. My galupki came with a side of mashed potatoes that were so buttery and savory there wasn't any need for gravy. My knife cut through the steamed cabbage roll like a hot knife cuts through butter, and the stuffing of pork, beef, rice, and onions made for a fantastic combination. If more Polish food is this good, then keep 'em coming. Which is why I went to my next restaurant, Smakosz, back in the city of Chicago. For this restaurant, I was able to interview the owner, Renata, and though she was a little camera shy, she did give me a first-hand account about the history of the restaurant, as well as its traditional Polish food that comes specifically from the city of Lublin. Renata's father opened the restaurant back in 1997. Renata herself is a second-generation owner of the restaurant. She took over the restaurant when her father sadly passed away, but she has honored his legacy with their authentic Polish food. It was in Smakosz that I had kompot for the first time. Kompot is a refreshing drink made of apples and strawberries that are blended and then put into a filter for the juices to seep through. It's the perfect drink for a hot summer day. Many of you could probably tell that I'm a sucker for a good Polish sausage, so I had to try Smakosz's Polish sausage as an appetizer, which comes with 4 traditional Polish pierogis that are filled with potato and farmer's cheese. It was delicious, and the Polish sausage had this satisfying snap every time you bit into it. But the main star of this restaurant is definitely the Lublin pork. Just look at it. It's absolutely glorious. As you can tell by the name, the Lublin pork is a Polish dish that comes from the city of Lublin, Poland. It is a dish that comes in layers. First, you have the potato pancake. Then you add creamy mushroom sauce that is made from scratch. Then you add the breaded pork, and finally, you top it off with a sunny side egg. The whole dish put together is tender, crunchy, and savory. Renata emphasized how everything in her restaurant is made fresh. No fillers, no preservatives, just like in Poland. They even have a small garden out back which they use to grow vegetables for their food during the summer. Renata wants smakosh to make food the way it's made back in her native city of Lublin. When she was growing up, Renata never knew about sodas or carbonated drinks. No, she drank kompot, made from fresh apples, strawberries, and even cherries from the farms she used to grow up in. Renata wants to share these experiences and tastes of Poland with the rest of Chicago. So do yourself a favor and get the Lublin pork if you ever go to Smakosh. You will not be disappointed. Now, during my interview with Dr. Peter Alter, he mentioned the Polish Jewish community. Manny's Deli is arguably Chicago's most famous Jewish deli. It was founded by brothers Jack and Charlie Raskin back in 1942. Now granted, I'm aware the Raskin brothers were from Russia, not Poland. But since this is still a Jewish deli, it's a perfect opportunity for Dr. Peter Alter to speak about the history of Polish Jews in Chicago.
What often gets overlooked, unfortunately, is that there were a significant number of Polish Jews. Now, calling folks Polish Jews will be like an identity statement. People would have to self-identify that way. But imagine if you're Jewish and you're coming out of like the Russian Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, or the German Empire, are you like, maybe you live in the Polish lands, so are you Jewish and Polish? Or are you Jewish and this larger identity from the monarchy in which you live? And then, of course, the same happens, are you Jewish living in communist Poland or interwar Poland? Or are you Polish and Jewish, or are you Polish? We do know, especially through research by one of my colleagues at the museum, Rebecca Kaufman, curator of religion and community history, that there were a significant number of people who self-identified as Polish Jews. There was an early synagogue actually before the Chicago fire in downtown, the Loop, in the 1850s that self-identified as a Polish Jewish synagogue. There are synagogues today that no longer see themselves as Polish Jewish, but have smaller congregations that merged into them that were at one time Polish Jewish, and that's for a number of communities. Also, one interesting thing that I learned from Dominic, and I don't know if it's in his book, but especially in the post-World War II era, if you look at Rogers Park, some people will say like, oh, that's the biggest Polish neighborhood because the folks living there were Polish Jews. Whether they self-identified as Polish Jews or not would take a lot more research than just saying, oh yeah, post-World War II, that was the biggest Polish community. But there were definitely folks living in that area on the north side who self-identified as Polish and Jewish. And we were able to work with the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center in suburban Skokie. They helped us with that research as well.
Of course, I can't finish this Polish food section without exploring at least one Polish bakery and trying Poland's most famous pastry, pączki. Thankfully, Polish bakeries are in abundance in Chicago, and for this video, I decided to go to Laramie Bakery and Deli, a proud Polish establishment that has been serving Polish pastries since 1986. While they serve pączkis, they also serve various other Polish and non-Polish pastries, such as this steamed blueberry cheesecake. I didn't even know you could steam cheesecakes. While pączkis are in demand all year round, they are especially popular during Fat Tuesday, before Ash Wednesday, when many Catholics begin to observe Lent. Laramie Bakery serves pączkis with various traditional fruit jam fillings, and even a strawberry jam and sweet cream cheese filling pączki that is a customer favorite. If you have a sweet tooth, pączkis will not disappoint. Do yourself a favor, buy half a dozen pączkis, take them home, and eat them with a nice cup of hot coffee. You'll thank me later. Many, if not every, immigrant community that comes to the U.S. goes through questions of identity. How can I honor the country I am from while still being American? The Polish community in Chicago has gone through this same question of identity. But what's different is that they actually have a word for it. Polskość. Polskość roughly translates to Polishness. And throughout the entirety of my research, this word always came up. Polskość. What is Polskość? What is Polishness? Can such an identity be defined? Is there anyone or anything that can define Polskość? As someone who isn't Polish, I can't answer this question, and if history serves me well, even asking what is Polskość can come with various answers. However, what Polskość does have is what it means to Polish people themselves and those who study Polish history. With that in mind, I asked everyone who was kind enough to participate in this video this question. What does Polskość mean to you?
As sort of academics would say, like the contestation or the fight over what does it mean to be Polish. So, many people would say, well, first of all, you have to be Roman Catholic. But in the early years of Chicago's Polish history, there's the Polish Roman Catholic Union of America and there's the Polish National Alliance, both two organizations that still exist today, both headquartered in the city, one in the Polish Triangle and one on the north side. So obviously the Polish Roman Catholic Union of America, we know where they stand on whether you need to be Roman Catholic to be Polish or not. But the Polish National Alliance at the time, late 19th, early 20th century, is like, no, you just need to support the rebirth of a Poland. So there's the religion aspect. There is also, can you be Polish American and maybe, the thing that you do is you go to the Constitution Day parade in May and maybe occasionally eat pierogi. So there's that. There's like, you have to be a certain thing, or can you just be I'm still Polish. And so people continually fight over what that means. And so the times when I was talking about opposite poles, the people who are here, the descendants of the four-bred immigrants before World War I, they're like, we're Polish. Then the displaced persons, refugees after World War II, no, we're Polish. We just came from Poland. And then the next group, they come in the Solidarity era, and everyone looks at them like, you can't be Polish. You came from communist Poland. And then sometimes people will say, and I've heard this, I don't know if it's true, but people have told me this then, the post-communist era, that 1990s, early 2000s, they are also educated coming from cities, and they're not necessarily interested in any of the institutions that belong to the three previous eras. They're doing their own things. So you have such a wide array of Polishness, and you could imagine, especially for, as a white person of European heritage, I could say, like, if there was a word in Gaelic for Irishness, like that would have certain parameters, right? Or Germanness, that would have certain parameters, and people would fight over that. And I think also today, you go to Poland and some people will look down on cities like Chicago and think all the Polish people here just eat pierogi, drink beer, and dance polka, which of course, living in Chicago, we know that's not true. That's a classist stereotype.
I think my perspective is probably just being here in the US. It's probably different than like the answer that I would have given you had I been living like my entire life back there, right?
Oh yeah, totally.
But I would say it's probably just being like proud of your heritage and being proud of the history that like the country, I would say, like the nation has endured over the years, and then which there's a lot. And I guess I will also say that, like, when you look up on Wikipedia or whatever other encyclopedia, right, it says, oh, Poland in 1980 became a country in 1918. And I'm like, that always made me so mad, just because there's just so much more history there. I was like, there's at least 2 centuries worth, and then there were a period in 1918. So okay, it's established in 1918 in the New World, right? So there's just so much history there, and then with the World War I, World War II, and then just hearing stories of pretty much from my great-grandpa. I remember going on Sundays as a child with my grandparents to visit my great-grandparents who lived like 30 minutes away. Yeah, and then my grandpa and my great-grandpa, so this is, my great-grandparents were my grandma's parents. So my grandpa always talking with his in-law about the war times. And like, just the stories from there, and then me, I don't know, at that point being like 5 years old, maybe 5, 6 years old, and I was just listening in, probably not realizing, like I knew it was deep and meaningful, but I just didn't realize until I grew up and learned more about the history of the world, right? Like how crazy all of that actually was, like what they went through, what they lived through. My great-grandpa was actually in one of the concentration camps in Majdanek, which was kind of in the area where we lived, and how he had like typhus. That was the only they would say that was like the only reason that he survived is just because they kind of like let him alone in the corner and then like did not force him to work and this or that, but
basically just left him to die.
Yeah, just left him to die. And but he survived. And then my grandma, like she was my great-grandma, she was caught in what they called like wapanka, where they would pull up with a truck and then just clear the street with all the people, and then would make them get up on the truck bed pretty much, and they would haul them off to either like a concentration camp or like a work camp, that sort of thing. How she escaped from the back of that truck. And I'm like, holy crap.
Holy crap is right.
Yeah. So just knowing all of that, I think bringing it back to Polskość is just like knowing all of the history and like what my family went through. I think that's just kind of, and I'm kind of getting a little emotional, but
it's okay. This is your story.
Yeah.
This is your story. It's important.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay. I'm so sorry. It's okay.
Like the whole pride thing, right? Bringing it back to America and knowing, kind of like hearing stories of people that would come here, like through Ellis Island and all those, immigrants in the late 18th century, early 19th, or I'm sorry, yeah, like 1800s, 1900s, and then how they were kind of like ashamed of that. And then they would, oh my gosh.
It's okay, it's human, don't worry about it.
And then, they would change their last names, so because they weren't necessarily accepted.
They would Americanize their name.
Which, to me, that's kind of sad when you're an adult. Like, I get it for kids, because you always want to fit in, right? When you're when your mom makes you the ethnic food and you bring it out to lunch and everyone's looking at you like, what is that, right? So I understand that.
It's delicious, that's what it is.
Yes, exactly. So I understand that, but it's just kind of sad when adults have to feel that and just change their last names so they're easier pronounced for the English language and whatnot. So, yeah. Wow, that was...
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That is a powerful story. As I mentioned before, I interviewed the owner of Smakosh restaurant, Renata. While she was a little camera shy, I did ask what does Polskość mean to her, and she wrote me an answer she wished me to read aloud. It says, quote, "Being Polish means carrying a deep appreciation for tradition, hospitality, and resilience. Our culture is built on rich history, strong family bonds, and of course, incredible food. Polish cuisine isn't just about flavors. It's about memories, stories, and the warmth of home. Whether it's a simple pierogi or a hearty bowl of bigos, every dish carries generations of tradition. For me, as a restaurant owner, it means sharing that heritage with others, making people feel welcome, and preserving the authentic taste of Poland." End quote. Thank you, Renata. That was very beautiful. When it comes to the Polish community in Chicago, the idea of Polskość will be my biggest takeaway from this journey of learning more about the city I call home through the lens of the Polish community that has called Chicago their home for nearly 2 centuries. Polskość might have different meaning to people within the Polish community, but one thing I've noticed is that Polskość has always been about the love and pride for Poland while still making a home in Chicago. The idea of Polskość has taken a life of its own, thanks to the generations upon generations of Polish people who have made immense sacrifices to endure various struggles and even discrimination to be one of the biggest communities in one of the US's biggest cities. From these sacrifices, the Polish culture has grown and ingrained itself so much in the history of Chicago that it is forever inseparable. Though I myself am not Polish, it has been an honor and privilege to have been given access to this wonderful culture thanks to the people who genuinely want to share what it means to be Polish. And, if I may be so bold, if I had to take a stab at what Polskość means, I would say that Polskość is Polish history. Polskość is Polish food. Polskość is Polish culture. Polskość is Polish people. And Polskość is Chicago. Thank you for watching.